Welcome and good afternoon from the seminar room called Kiev at the Institute for the Danube Region in Central Europe. My name is Sebastian Schäffer. I'm the director of the IDM, and I have the pleasure to moderate today's policy paper presentation. Well, to be honest, it's a presentation of a whole research project that we have conducted. Well, no, we didn't conduct it. We provided the framework. You conducted it over the past half a year almost. And we have had a closed-door interim discussion, and now we are very, very happy to present you the results of that research project that we've done together with the Policy Lab of the Central European University, together with Andrew Cartwright. Thank you very much for the cooperation, but of course, thank you very much to the student team that has done the research. 3 out of 4 are present today. Unfortunately, we have an illness. Hopefully, no viruses. Nowadays, this is something we need to be careful about. In any case, we are very much looking forward to hear more about the research results, but also present. We do have a couple of policy papers, but normally we don't have a presentation of them, which is a pity. In this case, we do it, so it's great. On the one hand, we'll hear a presentation of the overall results of the research project, but then we'll also have the policy paper physically here with us in the room. But if you're joining us online, you can find it on the IDM website, idm.at. And without further ado, I would say I'll hand over to project team to, what do you want to say, a few words?
No,
very good. To present us with what you found out of the past semester.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sebastian, and thank you for having us here at IDM and everyone that joins. So, since 2022, enlargement has gained prominence again and became an instrument of European security policy, with Ukraine and Moldova gaining candidate status, and there's renewed momentum in the Western Balkans. And there's a growing argument appearing within that candidate countries shouldn't simply just wait in the waiting room at the threshold of membership, but should begin participating in the EU structures meaningfully already before accession is complete. But here is where momentum and institutional reality kind of diverge, since despite the political shift, candidate states are still largely excluded or entirely excluded from having a voice in shaping the rules that they are expected to align with. And this dynamic is created because they sit entirely outside of the Council of the European Union workings. So that's where the ministers sit and where the rules are essentially produced. And furthermore, the framework that currently is governing enlargement is entirely built around the ACWIS transposition benchmarks. And it was never designed to evaluate whether candidate countries would be ready to join those safely and effectively in EU Council structures. So that's kind of the two-fold gap that we set out to explore. And we will show in this presentation how we envision EU enlargement being able to accelerate safely through a tiered participation framework for EU Council integration of candidate states. And we are presenting today, it was already been mentioned by Sebastian, but on the basis of 2 outputs. So first of all, the policy paper that was published by IDM, which sets out the concrete recommendations that we have found on how the EU Council can integrate candidate states in its workings, but also on the basis of an extended policy analysis paper that will be soon to be published by Central European University, which essentially lay out the foundations that underpin these recommendations. So, yes. So before we get into how we have explored the twofold gap, I just want to quickly present who we are and what we do. So I'm Luna Dupano. I am doing my master's in European Public Policy as part of the Erasmus Mundus Masters. And within the project, I mainly focused on the legal architecture and what kind of underdeveloped opportunities lay within that. And Greta Vaino cannot sadly be here because of sickness, but she's also a public policy student, and she mainly focused on the administrative capacity side.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. I'm Nia from Georgia. I study public policy also, and for this project, I mainly focused on political dimension and the window opportunity that has been opened after the war in Ukraine.
My name is Nalali Bogosarian, and I'm studying international public affairs at CEU. And during this project, I mainly focused on the security dimension and security guidelines that we should take into consideration while we are building this participation framework.
And here's how we structured today's presentation. And I want to flag that this is not just a list of topics, but they build on each other. We start with presenting the actual problem. Candidate states are integrated without being represented. That raises a critical question. Does it matter enough for the EU to act on it? And afterwards, section 2 addresses that yes, the benefits are real, but we also have the risks that we have to think about carefully. That leads naturally to section 3. What does the current framework actually allow? Our findings here is perhaps surprising, but also interesting. Legal, administrative, and security dimensions with political part are building on each other. However, something that we found very important is that it's not only about what is possible, but how can we do it safely for the whole system. All of this comes together in our tiered participation framework for the council integration, for tiers of participation, each tied to verifiable thresholds, which are also reversible. And finally, section 6 translates all of this into 6 concrete policy recommendations, which is for EU Council, and they could act on it without risking the legal framework. So let me start with the core problem that is say here. EU enlargement, as it currently works, creates that what political scientists describe as integration without representation. Candidate countries have to adapt, implement, and defend the rules and the legal and institutional reforms that they had no voice in shaping, and think about what it means actually, all of this in politically. This gives leverage to Eurosceptic forces to use these legitimacy arguments and create this risk. And the consequences are actually real because public support for EU membership across Western Balkans has fallen from around 70% to 70% in the early 2010s to somewhere 50 and 60% today, depending on the countries. Serbia's alignment with the EU foreign policy positions sits at 47%. What is happening in Georgia because the pro-EU shifts to the Moscow, and then came 2022, which was Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which fundamentally changed the picture and created a geopolitical window for this. So our central question lies: how does EU integrate candidate states quickly, safely, and legitimately? I want to be honest about the both sides of this because we have benefits and dangers. The benefits are of earlier structured engagement are substantial. It creates a strategic buffer, bringing candidate countries into EU institutional habits before accession, which reduces the risks and drive to alternative partnerships. It provides policy legitimacy for pro-European governments and also serves as kind of a democratic anchor because it supports democracy consolidation across the candidate countries. And the countries which are also in the process of EU engagement, EU integration, they get this leverage and tangible argument and political outcome to present domestically. But there we have dangers which are relevant. We can start with enlargement fatigue because Eurobarometer data shows that yes, most of the people in EU are in support of EU enlargement, but when they are asked about concrete timelines and concrete countries, the support drops. We have also sovereignty concerns concerns because there are several member states who treat council meetings as spaces for only exclusive full members. We can't talk about this without mentioning security risks that is at stake here, and Milana will be talking about it more, and inconsistent alignment because we can't give all countries the same leverage as Serbia with a 47% CFSP alignment and the same access as Moldova, which has 86%. And our framework is built on one core principle that each tier is a gate, not a gift, and we have to differentiate that. To shortly touch on administrative part, we identify 4 critical pillars: central coordination, candidate states need functioning, EU secretaries or PM offices capable of forming a single coherent missional position, technical depth. It is important that not to talk about only politicians. We need line ministry experts who can hold their own on technical working parties, and also the Brussels interface. There must be a procedural fluency, skilled officials who understand the informal networks, and also, which is really interesting, absorption systems. We have to have some kind of audit and control bodies ready to actually manage EU funds and policy delivery. We have detailed specific metrics for each of these in our extended full policy report. And I'm gonna now hand over to Una, who will dive into legal pathways.
Yes, thank you, Nia. So we have seen the current paradox, what is at stake for the EU and what they need to juggle, and as well the administrative capacity and its opportunities. But now I will walk us through the 3 legal opportunities that the EU has, but are currently underused in the context of engaging candidate states in the EU Council workings. So to scale back a little bit is the 2020 Council Legal Service opinion. It's been routinely cited as closing entirely the door to candidate engagement EU Council workings. And we're certainly not disputing what is cited in there and what the Treaty of the EU says, namely that observer status, permanent observer status, voting rights, and formal representation are totally not for candidate states. They are only if you have actual membership status. If that's not possible without treaty change. But within that boundary, we identified 3 meaningful pathways that are underused and are great opportunities for EU Council engagement of the candidate states. So first of all, there are the Article 6.1 of the Council of the Rules of Procedure. This allows the Council to invite any third country representative, in this case it would be candidate country representatives, to attend the Council meeting for a specific agenda item, and only to provide information exchange, answer and also ask questions themselves, and exchange any views. And they have to leave before any kind of deliberation begins. However, what we crucially found is that this specific article, which is aimed at the Council itself, could also be applied to any preparatory bodies. So, for example, the Council working groups and also COREPER, which would be also more easy to argue that they are not influencing the candidate states are not influencing decision making. Then the second opportunity would be pre or post Council dialogues. And this would be an informal ministerial exchange of information held around the Council sessions. So they're explicitly separate from the formal agenda. And we already have, in this case, an actual example, which is the Gimnich meeting of May 2025, in which the presidency invited not only foreign ministers of member states, but also foreign ministers of the candidate states for a working lunch right after one of the important council meetings on Ukraine support. So we can see that it is already happening, but currently it is not really used and it should be systematized. And the third opportunity would be non-council fora. These would be legally distinct bodies that sit outside of the council, but would feed directly into the workings of the EU Council. And the model we would here suggest would be the Schengen Mixed Committee. Here, associated states, so Schengen countries, which are not all part of the EU, still have the ability to discuss decision-making and any kind of policies that would be implemented later, but the decisional autonomy of these decisions formally still stays with the council alone. So therefore, there are three possible pathways with different depths of engagement for the candidate states. So, but what we then see is that it's not necessarily the question whether the treaties allow candidate states to participate in some kind of way with EU Council workings, but more how to ensure that candidate states can use these spaces sustainably, responsibly, and safely. And that is exactly what Milana will touch upon now.
Before discussing the participation formats, we must ask a very important question. What actually makes early integration safe? And current enlargement benchmarks are largely designed to measure legal and political convergence. So things like chapter progress, formal alignment, and active transposition, these are very important, don't get me wrong. But they don't tell us whether a state can safely operate inside EU decision-making structures. And in practice, earlier participation creates operational risks that existing enlargement tools do not fully capture. And this includes the ability to protect EU classified information and maintaining institutional reliability under pressure and respond to the cyber or hybrid threats. So our argument is that security couldn't remain just as a background concern. It has to become part of architecture of participation itself. In other words, the key question is not whether participation is possible, but under what condition it remains safe. So to operationalize this, we developed what we call security gates. The idea is simple. Participation should expand only when specific categories of risk are sufficiently managed. So the first gate is information and cybersecurity. Here the concern is whether candidate states can securely handle sensitive information and operate within EU communication environments. So that includes secure handling standards, reading room procedures, and operational cyber response capacity. The second gate focuses on geopolitical and hybrid risks. Earlier participation may create opportunities for external interference, coercion, or strategic disruption inside the EU fora. So to mitigate this, participation would remain segmented and reversible, with safeguards such as agenda segmentation and suspension mechanisms during period of elevated risk. The third gate is institutional integrity. This addresses whether institutions are reliable counterparts in practice, so including resilience against politicization, organized crime penetration, weak enforcement capacity. Here we propose mechanisms like vetted micro-delegations, joint vetting procedures, and continuous evaluation. Together, these gates determine how far and how fast participation could expand across the tiers. And importantly, this framework remains fully reversible. So if risks increase or backsliding occurs, participation can be limited or rolled back. This directly addresses concerns about locking in premature access. And now I am handing it to Luna to explain the participation framework.
Yes, exactly. So this is the clear participation framework that we developed, which kind of brings all the different aspects that we just touched upon together. I would want to also say that it's in the policy brief, but it's printed quite small, so it's easier to follow it on the screen. But yes, so to guide you through it, essentially there are 4 different tiers of participation in which each one is deeper than the last. And each one is tied to what a candidate state has actually demonstrated it can handle, which with Milana in a bit we'll get into what that exactly entails. The starting point of it all is informal dialogue. This is invitation-based occasionally and entirely outside of formal council proceedings. So think back of the May 2025 Gimnich meeting format. So candidate ministers are invited to engage informally with their EU counterparts around a formal session on selected topics with no access to decision-making whatsoever. So it's very much low exposure, low risk, but it gets candidate states into the conversation of decisions shaping. Then we move on to tier number 2, which is working party engagement under Article 6.1 of the Council Rules of Procedure. Here, candidate states receive item-specific invitations to the technical working parties. Access to non-classified or restricted files only. Delegations are screened before they can enter these working parties. And crucially, candidates leave before any kind of deliberations would start. So it still would be occasional ad hoc invitations, still no decision access, but now they're very much into the preparatory body itself. The third tier extends the same legal basis, so again, Article 6.1, but up to the curricular level. So it's now really much directly below the council itself and would directly feed into what is discussed within the EU Council. Participation would here, we would envision becomes more systematized and would be structured rather than just ad hoc invitations. And what is still very important is that that everything is still explicitly non-decisional. But the depth of engagement, but therefore also the risk would be meaningfully higher than in the previous 2 tiers. And then the final highest tier is embedded non-council fora, which we envisioned, as already said, modeled on the Schengen Mixed Committee logic. So legally distinct bodies that feed systematically into council work while leaving formal decisional autonomy with the council. Here, like candidate states would move to a systematized and co-responsible policy-making role, really much participating in that decision-shaping role, but still not in decision-making.
So now let's go deeper and let's have a look at this framework, which operationalizes gradual participation through 2 parallel dimensions, the security one and political. So the security dimension assesses whether a candidate state can safely operate within the EU institutional environments. This includes the ability to handle sensitive information, maintain secure communications, and demonstrate resilience against cyber and hybrid threats. The political dimension focuses on reliability and alignment. Here we look not only at the formal CFCP alignment, but also institutional coordination capacity, strategic consistency, and resilience against external influence or politicization. So together, these 2 dimensions determine how far participation can expand across the different tiers. The first level is informal dialogue. So as Luna previously mentioned, this is a low exposure format, focuses on technical exchange and formalization. At this stage, participation is occasional and limited to selected non-sensitive discussions. On the security side, the requirements are relatively limited. So it's basic national information security structures and the ability to handle restraint level materials. Politically formal CFCP alignment is sufficient at this stage without requiring fully developed and coordination structures. The second level is working party engagement under Article 6.1. Here, candidate states could participate in selected technical working parties dealing with non-classified or restrained level files. Participation remains explicitly non-decisional. Here, security requirements became stricter. So stronger infra-security compliance, operational CSRT, and reliable handling record. Politically, candidate states must demonstrate not only formal, but also strategic CFCP alignment, alongside basic institutional coordination capacity. The third tier expands participation into more structured working party and COREPER-related engagement. At this point, participation becomes more systematic, so the framework requires demonstrated secure handling capacity, participation in EU or NATO cyber exercises, and verified infosecurity performance. Politically, this tier also requires stronger institutional independence and demonstrated coordination reliability. So the final tier involves embedded participation in non-council fora linked to EU policy-making process. Because this is the highest exposure level, the framework requires near EU equivalent security standards, so proven incident management capacity and sustained institutional resilience. Politically, states must demonstrate long-term strategic alignment and resilience against foreign influence. To make the framework more concrete, we include the example of Montenegro in the policy brief. And under this model, Montenegro would likely qualify for a lower exposure participation tier because it demonstrates relatively strong formal alignment with the EU and advanced accession progress, but persistent concerns regarding organized penetration, institutional stability, and external dependencies would likely limit participation to technical working parties or non-classified or restrained level files. Only after several assessment cycles demonstrating stronger infosecurity performance, sanction enforcement capacity, and institutional reliability would progression to higher exposure observer formats would be possible. And importantly, progression across tiers is conditional and reversible. So participation is earned through demonstrated performance rather than political dissertation alone. And access can be limited or rolled back if risks increases or backsliding occurs.
Yeah, thank you, Milana, for walking us through our proposed tier participation framework again. And this all leads to 6 concrete policy recommendations that we have identified. And what I want to highlight is one guiding principle that guides all of these. Oh, sorry, it says 6. There are 5, but you get the gist of it. But the 5 are based on the core principle, which is operationalized conditionality. Candidate states can only earn participation through verifiable performance, not political changes or political goodwill, but only through demonstrated readiness. And this directly feeds into the first policy recommendation, which is that the EU needs to move beyond these aqueous transposition benchmarks. Transposing directives tells us only whether a country can sign an EU law or even implement it, but it doesn't tell us anything about whether it can participate safely in EU Council workings. And therefore, we recommend the proposed participation readiness framework to be implemented. Then the second is that framework must be structured in tiers. We propose that this is from informal dialogue towards non-council fora, like the pathways we have outlined. And each tier should be measurable and should also be subject to be fully reversible. And the third one is that there's the need to be a participation readiness scorecard, which is jointly maintained by the Commission, European External Action Service, and the Council Secretariat, which would be a direct determinant of the access that is provided. It covers the 3 dimensions, which we outlined in our security analysis, being information and cybersecurity capacity, institutional integrity, and geopolitical alignment. And the fourth one is that the scorecard must be verifiable, with not only candidate state reporting, but also EU-level audits and independent monitoring. And recommendation 5 ties it together, meaning that the preconditions in this framework must be gradually increasing when a state advances through the tier. So the bar must rise every time it goes through the tier framework. And with that, where thresholds are no longer met, participation gets downgraded or even suspended. To recap, the EU faces here a genuine strategic problem. How do you integrate EU candidate states meaningfully, but also safely enough that it protects the EU decision-making and legitimacy? And current frameworks and benchmarks do not answer that question, and we believe that this tiered framework, participation framework, with our recommendation does. The administrative and legal space, as we have identified, is there, There's just a need for an all-encompassing framework to use them systematically. But more about this can be read in our policy paper. Can be read in our policy paper, but also if you're interested in more what the foundations are of the recommendations and more in-depth analysis of everything we've talked about, there will be the soon published policy analysis report on it all. But for now, we look forward to your comments, ideas, critiques, and questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I mean, for me, it is really fantastic to see that from less than a year when I did a discussion on how can actual participation in certain EU institutions be possible to now have concrete policy recommendations developed by you, how this is actually feasible. So this is really something, and I want to stress that that is a fantastic cooperation with the CEU. This is an outcome that I believe is quite impressive. With regards to questions and comments, I'm happy to open up also, of course, for if we have virtual guests here, but I will take the privilege to ask the first question. We have a situation that you analyzed that is resembling this staged accession model that has been developed with regards to EU membership in general, where on the one hand side, I think it's very good to look at different avenues. I also like the idea of those gates that you call the different tiers here. But of course, the question arises, and this is the question that I still also have with that stage model, is like, isn't this something where it might end up that you are stuck in this endless loop of back and forth, and that it is something like, look, you advance a little bit, but then you are downgraded maybe, and isn't there a danger that this would lead to some sort of infinity loop of moving back and forth and around that ultimately does not lead to an integrated
I can take the question.
Yeah.
I think yes, there are definitely dangers in it, but from our perspective, I think I want to speak from is that the benefits of moving from, because it's now so much stuck in a waiting room that yes, it could be it could go wrong in a sense that it would be an endless cycle just going back and forth, but it still would give more incentives to move somewhere in a way than just being stuck in this waiting room for a lot of years. And this could give more, as we see it, incentive to candidate states to in other ways comply also more with the EU. So what we see is it's a lot about just applying with the rules, but also about certain cybersecurity or other aspects to move and be more involved in decision shaping, which could intensify more and would have more benefit than it would maybe have fallen.
And I can add that right now, a lot of candidate countries are concentrating on the chapter progress on the e-bars, that they actually kind of forget, or it becomes like in the background to the implementation itself. And while we were conducting the interviews with the experts from the candidate countries, that was the key problem, that yes, all these bills are being passed that are interested for the EU, but the implementation itself is not there, because a lot of the people, they don't even read when they tick yes, the bill passed. They just have the instructions saying, yes, this is needed in order to satisfy the EU requirements, and that's it. And afterwards, how could we track down the progress of the implementation? And therefore, we believe this tier framework participation, it gives, first of all, a hope, I would say, because the hope is declining among the candidate countries to become members. And second of all, the system how they can actually do that. And that just passing the bills is not enough. Just having this legal alignment or it's not enough and political as well. So there should be administrative part and security part there as well. And independent audits from the EU side, not just the regional reports on the development.
Yes, and it's a great incentive for countries because they are already susceptible to third world powers, and they are increasing their influence in the candidate countries, and it's a great way to deal with that also and counter those forces in there.
Thank you. Yeah, sure, Andrew.
I would follow the line of argument that you just raised, Bastian, because each of the three tiers in some ways can be broken down into if you like, a narrower form of access. It suggests that there could be sectoral kind of, in some ways, movement, whereby candidate countries get invited a greater greater participation in certain fields. The selection of which could be done by political decision making, it could be done by the importance of the country, and different criteria. So in other words, you get, let's say, Moldova, where it has full access to discussions about rural development, but it doesn't have access in the same way to justice and security. Is that in some ways an advisable or a potential way forward that you would allow for a sectoral deepening on strategically chosen areas as a means of advancing things forward and hoping that would bring along the other parts that are, if you like, lagging behind?
No, definitely, because the invitations would mostly be about where it would be the EU and for the candidate countries would bring some kind of benefit in a sense if the chapters are opened on agriculture, for example, that they may be and they have all the security and political things in line, they would already be in tier 2. But for example, indeed, if they haven't started opening any chapters on that on a specific topic and don't have it aligned, then also there wouldn't be an invitation on that specific. And that would kind of going back to the from Sebastian you raised on that. Yes, it could be a cycle, but it will also give incentive to, if you see what kind of benefits it gives you in the agricultural chapter, that it would also maybe push in the justice chapter or whatever to also move along to be able to participate in decision shaping.
Because at the end of the day, we are not only targeting EU as a beneficiary party, because we believe that the candidate countries should as well have benefit from that. And we believe that this micro access to specific chapters and specific committees would give them know-hows and new perspectives on how it could be done in their own countries, and that would be beneficial to them as well.
Yeah, and also they get a sense of how it all operates, and when they are full members, they get a sense of what to actually do in that case. And we can also prioritize some sectors which are more relevant, and they are more invested in those. So it would be also a great thing to think about.
Sure, please.
Hi, thank you. I'm Alexandra Venus. I'm senior researcher at the British Labour Foundation India and also lecturer at the CEU. Excellent presentation, thanks, and excellent ideas. I have 3 questions, if I may. First is very simple. Is it legally already possible to do what you propose, or if not, what needs to be done? Second, if you were to name a few candidate countries beyond Montenegro, where would you put them according to those tiers? So where would Ukraine, for instance, fit, where would Moldova fit, etc.? And third is perhaps what interests me most, because it's about the political rationale of your reasoning. So the goal seems to be accelerate EU enlargement, right? So do I understand you correctly, especially since you were speaking about third party or third country influence, that it's kind of, to put it very simplified, it's about making sure those countries are not in the sphere of influence of Russia and other actors, but rather in EU's sphere of influence, and make sure that they get kind of closer to the EU. Why I'm asking this is to think this kind of through and further. Don't you also see a risk that, let's say, by accelerating accession of certain countries, we might get more division and more disagreement within the already such diverse EU that, especially on foreign policy, already has such a big problem on aligning on a position. You know what I mean? So I would like to hear your thoughts on that in somewhat longer term.
I mean, I can take the first question on legal architecture since I mostly was focusing on that. Yes, it is possible to give a little bit of a side note on that. There was in 2020 a Council Legal Service opinion, which was very strict on what participation means and whether decision shaping is already countering the autonomy of the EU Council making decisions. But there are enough, as we have from our interviews and from my own legal research, research, examples of where it has been done, not with candidate states, but with other states that are not part of the EU. So it should be possible legally. Then the other candidates.
Yeah, sure. I can take the second question and maybe a little bit of the third. So as for the second question, where we would position the other candidate countries, let's say the Ukraine, right? Ukraine, security speaking, it has very strong stance because it has an amazing CSRT, so the Computer Emergency Response Team. And in general, they are very resistant to the hybrid threats and cyber threats as well. But obviously, the other question is politically, how politically independent they are in terms of the coercion and the Russian attempts to influence and penetrate through that. And I would say right now we could put Ukraine at the lower exposure tier, even though it has it showed an amazing security capacity, but at the same time, it could be still dangerous, speaking from the political side, to gain the to moving forward in the tier participation framework. And as for Moldova, I would say the same because right now, unfortunately, the influence of Russia is still strong, even though now we see the move towards the EU with the elections win, but still we could not risk that because when it comes to the candidate countries which are the most interest of Russia, like in this case Moldova and Ukraine and obviously Georgia, then we could not really give them broader access, right, and like higher tier just because of that, because we could risk EU classified information, the leakage, even if it's not intended from the representatives of these countries, but still.
And our main goal is not to just counter these third world countries. Our goal is to give those kind of countries some kind of hope, incentive for the future, and to prepare them for full EU membership. And that's our main goal. And we have to be careful, and the safely is the key word there. So.
Yeah, because we also care about the EU, right, and EU classified information, and that's why we could obviously give the access to the restraint level of the files, and yeah. And as for the third question, the influence of Russia, I believe it's a great question, and that's why we emphasize so much on the security dimension here, because we need to understand that Russian influence is strong. And it penetrates not only the government itself, but also the institutions. And some of the institutional dependence could be questioned in some countries. So that's why we should be very careful when we assess these countries, right? And that's why we have the reversible mechanisms. And as we have seen, as an example of Hungary before the elections, that's the case that it was influenced by Russia, but it is a member of EU. So what we are supposed to do, because it has a full access to all EU channels, whole EU information, and the chambers, right? And that's a very tricky situation that we don't want to put EU into, and the Canadian countries as well.
Yeah, just your second part of the third question was right, whether it would only make the EU even more politically diverse on the opinions.
Yeah.
And what we thought is as a secondary effect, maybe if this framework would be implemented, would be that it's also more socialized within the EU. If it would be since they are so long in the waiting room already, and a lot of them gonna be, whether if they would be more engaged in different kind of institutional capacity. We are now targeting EU Council, but it could also be EU Parliament or anything else, that they would get more socialized within the EU system. That is then kind of a goal as well, that would also slightly counter the fact that when they whom gets into the EU, that then they already have the same thinking pattern.
And it's also the setting the norms, the informal norms. So it's not just about the official meetings, it's also the part of networking. And it's also the part of taking the values from the EU and implementing it into the candidate countries. Because once the candidate countries would have the access, they would have more hope. They are no longer as just observers. They would have the feeling of the participation in the process, and therefore it would drastically help with the norms implementation in the countries, right? And networking.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
Thank you. David Dombor, EU Awareness Center. Very impressive job, congratulations. My question is more of practical nature, and maybe it first and foremost goes to the professors of this exercise. I wonder what will it have some practical application? You quite correctly say here that it proposes a new framework for all decision makers, member countries, as well as candidate countries. So it will be pity if it stays just as an academic exercise and will not be somehow implemented in practice. We are not full of the elements of it. Do you have any ideas about this or some initial talks with those who are in charge of the processes in Brussels?
I wouldn't go as far as say we've got connections in Brussels that would sort of take this forward, but to go back to your kind of more fundamental claims, this is about trying to make research more applicable and practicable by getting people to work with, if you like, a broader public than just an academic public. So in other words, rather than going to conferences where academics talk to academics, instead, the idea is that the students would talk to a range of people who have expertise based on perhaps research, but also based on political kind of work or work for the EU or work for a ministry. So in some ways, the eventual sort of basis for the work is not just traditional academic reviews of academic literature. It's reviews of both the grey literature, academic literature, and then interviewing people to test various theories. So this is obviously a very sort of ambitious piece because it addresses a number of countries with a very complicated problem. But I think the process of doing it, process of working with, if you like, a non-academic public intellectual research institution such as IBM means that we have the chance to engage with different. So we're not just trying to kind of get the students to publish for European science. We want them to be published as it is today, which is here, in a different format, where the idea is to kind of do a research exercise that addresses a difficult problem, but views it from a number of angles, has opportunities for consultation. This is the second time now we've had no occasion to consult. And no doubt, well, hopefully from our side, this would have some sort of considerations. It could be another cooperation with legislation in the year to come. But it also might be that this gets picked up. that's always the ideal of policy papers. It's like, whether the ideas of security gates or community engagement get picked up and found in discourse, that would in some ways be something where, if we could find that, then we'd know that we've done something.
And if I can add maybe to it, of course, I mean, it's published within our policy paper series, so we are communicating the things that we are publishing towards the audience that we have. It ranges also from decision makers to embassies to actually representation of the mission. They were also targeted with this event, and there will be event follow-ups that we are communicating to them within the framework of the closed door discussion that we organized for the research that has been done here. There have been already a couple of embassies and a couple of involved that also asked for a follow-up. Yeah, but of course, I mean, there's a lot of challenge, a lot of ideas out there. Let's see, but of course, I mean, from our perspective, we wouldn't publish this. We don't think that this is something that we try to also bring it into a broader public discussion. We think it would contribute to maybe alleviate the overall still stalling situation within new enlargement, because we're honestly looking at, yes, there has been some progress. There might be a little movement towards actually a situation that we haven't had in more than a decade, where we probably finally get an accession treaty that we can discuss about. But at the moment, not so much has happened in the past 4 years. Another thing that we have also researched at IDM is the overall length of negotiations in all successful negotiations was below 4 years. So there could have been much more progress over the past years. And I think this is an excellent contribution to, with all the dangers that we've discussed, that it's some sort of alternative. But I think it's absolutely necessary to think and communicate possibilities that will accelerate that. And this fits excellently in the things that we have been doing in a broader framework. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
About the progress of the research. I know what you found most challenging about presentation. Well, I mean, research for more than 6 months, right? And you had expert interviews, you had quality issues, expectations. And so what's most challenging? And also what would you have done differently?
Yeah, I could answer that we were relying a lot on the current evaluation tools like chapter progress, e-bars, and we thought that this is tools that we should use while doing our research. But after we were conducting the interviews with the experts, we realized that actually in practice they're not so reliable. Because as I mentioned before, that some of the voting on the specific bills for the EU to close the chapter, to have a positive bars, it's people don't even look what's written there. That's at least what I got from the expert from Montenegro, that they just pass yes, done, and that's it. And what about the implementation? And the second is audits, right? That there is a lack of the independent audits that would not only consist of the regional reports, but also would be conducted by EU side in the country, right on the ground, basically. So from my side, that was very, very interesting, discovery while we were doing the research.
No, definitely. It was especially in yeah, exactly that. Like for me, also legally, it was when I read that it was not possible. It was already like, oh, okay, I guess that's the end of research. But then exploring it more, especially with experts, it really discover there is more wiggle room that sometimes is explored. So what maybe would be differently is already a bit earlier target experts than first. Yeah, like it's like I kind of approach it maybe more as an academic piece than just a project in general. So talk more to experts on the topic, because there's a lot of information and knowledge that just is not published enough.
I would choose this topic over and over again if it was September, but yeah, For the political part, it was surprising how many geopolitical forces are at stake here, navigating through them, and how can we in practice ensure the safety of these countries. So, yeah, it was it. And it was like the situation in Georgia and in Caucasus in general was in parallel. And I was also navigating through that in parallel. So, yeah, it's nice.
And I may also add for the security part, when I was kind of evaluating the security capacity of the candidate countries, for example, the emergency response teams. Unfortunately, not all countries have this information available. For example, the incident rates, for example, the team, member of the teams, and so on and so forth. So it was quite interesting observation that, yeah, and a lot of reports regarding that were published by the third parties. So the NGOs, but not directly by the government. So that was interesting. And yeah, and there were like some gaps for some years that you have like zero statistics for the year when it comes to security. So I was like, wow, that's nice. But yeah.
And was Armenia part of your research? It's not a candidate country, but I hate to say it, more advanced than my country, Georgia.
Yes, I did, because I'm right now, besides this, I'm also working specifically on Armenian case, but it's not part of this project. But yes, in the case of Armenia, it was the same, that it was lack of the transparency when it comes to the security dimension, and specifically cybersecurity, because they officially have two bodies, so ISA and IMCSRT, but basically they don't have MOUs between these organizations, and everything. When I was conducting also expert interviews from the people in Armenia from cybersecurity field, they said that the way it's handled, the incident is over a phone. Okay, I'm gonna take this over, like this incident gonna be taken over by me, and so on and so forth. So yeah, but now there is a hope because there was a bill in 2025, cybersecurity law, but it's still not implemented. Right?
Where it was.
It's in Armenia, yeah, but it's still not being implemented. So we are still kind of waiting how it's gonna reform, and the elections are coming. So right now everything is kind of on the pause. And let's see after the elections if the goals of the current government will be the same regarding cybersecurity domain.
Yes, written an article about looking more at how candidate countries also are countering FIMI, if this should not be part of the actual discussion negotiation. I've been very nicely. Maybe there is even a possibility
Yeah.
for a follow-up later on. Yeah. What could we have done differently as IDM?
Sure.
No one is perfect. It's okay. No, nobody is. We're live streaming. No, it's fine. No, be honest. That's all right.
You know what but maybe in the beginning was a bit hard, but also became an opportunity, but it was so broad. And which took a bit of time to kind of get our own way in what we're gonna do. But in the end, it's allowed us the space we got to do something that we all didn't expect in the beginning, but to actually make our own framework and learn a lot. So it is maybe a bit of a like in the sense, in the beginning it was quite hard to find a way what we're gonna do, but in the end it's worked out well for
Thank you. Well, I think it was a very a very good premiere. You see that? Yeah, is that sounds strange a bit, but yeah, I'm always looking to my language, like Rebecca Thorne. But I think it was really interesting for everyone involved. We learned a lot, and we are very happy that this was the first time. We set a very high bar for future collaborations that hopefully will materialize. So thank you very much again to the research team, and of course also Andrew and the cooperation with the CEU. And yeah, let's keep in touch and see where we can take this. Thank you very much.